Alright, so we are going to try to make this one a quickie because admittedly I want to go to bed. We are on the eve of the 2022 French Open final. Will be contested against the guy that is most familiar to the back end of this tournament in Rafael Nadal, attempting to reclaim his title against Casper Ruud, a first time but surprise finalist. But when you do look at this draw, and ever since it was unveiled, I guess something like this always was possible. There were a couple of people I would have had ahead of Ruud, as you saw in my predictions in this bottom half, but in spite of, I think, fair to say, taking advantage of a draw that kind of opened up for him, it's not as if Casper Ruud is some pushover. I guess I will start with him. His road here has been a tale of two halves. I think the opening portion of his tournament run was pretty tight. Understandably so in his first round against Joe Tsonga, who was potentially playing his last match and ended up being his last match. Ruud was understandably, not at his best and nervous during that match, then almost stumbled to Lorenzo Sonego. That was a match that felt very important given how last year he came in similarly pretty high as far as the pecking order on clay and stumbled early on to Alejandro Davidovich Fokina. Looked like something similar might happen here at 2-1 down to Sonego. However, Casper was able to pull that out and get over a bit of his demons with having not made the second week at Roland Garros yet to this point, and after that I think he's just handled it very maturely. I think that his experienced age won it out against Holger Rune in the quarterfinals, talented and feisty teenager who obviously took out Stefano Tsitsipas, and I can't say that Ruud really dodged a bullet there. I had been making note of that throughout, that Tsitsipas this clay court season, in my view, really overachieved as far as results went. He really was just winning off of competing really, really well and, using his physicality. But other than that, this was not the same player that we saw on clay a year ago throughout, and it showed even early on at Roland Garros. And in spite of the fact that I did have him making the final here, it really looked very early on that something like this could be a possibility where he wouldn't be a surefire shoo-in into the final out of the bottom half, and sure enough, that is exactly what happened. And on the other hand, Marin Cilic really had a nice tournament. He's had a nice year, nice last couple of years in my opinion. He looked really over the hill in my opinion for a couple of years there after 2018. However, he's bounced back nicely, had a really good win against Daniil Medvedev where he showcased that apex Cilic level where he seems just about unbeatable and was blasting winners left and right there. And then again against Andrei Rublev in his quarterfinal, was a 5-setter. However, Cilic was just battering the ball throughout there on serve, and his ground strokes obviously came with its errors, with his issues of consistency. He can't really be at that god mode level all the time, and he ended up being at it in the final set tiebreak in that match. However, against Casper Ruud, I think Ruud's just steadiness won out in the semifinals, and I think Cilic, his fuel tank was running on empty very quickly after the first set. But Ruud, to his credit, I think in that match, admittedly I haven't watched all that much of Casper Ruud. Mostly it's been over the last year, but as far as I could tell, that was as well as I've ever seen Ruud play. After the first set, he pretty much stopped making errors, and his serve was large and in charge, actually, when you would have thought it would have been the Croat in Cilic whose serve would have had the advantage as far as that was concerned. However, Casper Ruud really was just raining down aces in that match, and I think his serve has really improved even over the last year, both as far as placing it really well and really not making his second serve attackable, at least on the clay. Gets a lot of work even out of his second. and he was pretty much able to jump all over Cilic in the second half of that match once the legs went out. Obviously, Casper played a role in that also. He exacerbated that issue for Cilic with the fatigue. But yeah, I mean, I think second half of this run, Ruud has really gotten to playing his best tennis, and that is something you always want to see. Rafael Nadal, of course, in my past couple of videos during this tournament, I've made note of, what a gauntlet it has been for him to get here. For sure, that did not ease up in the semifinals. In fact, I probably would say that even though I still think Alcaraz will be excellent and beyond Zverev eventually, I think Rafa probably has a tougher matchup against Zverev than Alcaraz at this point, and Zverev really was getting back to playing some of his best tennis. As I said earlier, Rafa, even when he started this head-to-head up 5-0, these matches have always been close. Never a comfortable matchup for him, and Rafa early on in the rivalry really was just banking on outlasting in this head-to-head. Sasha really just puts him in a tough spot on pretty much any court, with particularly how well Zverev moves for a big guy, and obviously his tall, lanky stature gives him such great reach, and as a result, I think Rafa really has always had a lot of trouble hitting through him. And given the youth advantage Zverev has there, it really has made Nadal oftentimes just dig really deep into his toolkit and find really any avenue possible to end points quickly, particularly once he gets fatigued, and that's exactly what was the case in most of the second set of this match. Not to mention that the conditions were absolutely ridiculous. It pretty much exacerbated these matchup problems that Nadal has that usually makes this such a struggle between the two. This tweet by Matt Willis that I saw early in their semifinal match pretty much sums it up to a T. And with the roof closed, it really made it so muggy, and it really looked like an oven in there. Nadal obviously sweating buckets, and both guys really were having so much trouble hitting through this court with how much it slowed down under the roof, and the proof is in the pudding. Obviously, it took 3 hours and 13 minutes as this match was at 7-6, 6-all heading into second set tiebreak. Before I talk about the injury, I do want to say that I think this match was another example of that Zverev conundrum that I have talked about in the past. I made a video on him where I basically addressed this as a whole, but, it does seem that Zverev, is mostly his issues are mental. Second serve obviously goes off the rails sometimes, but that's mostly mental most of the time, with it usually depending on how much scoreboard pressure is up against him. And again, it was weird in this match because Zverev came out of the gates so strong. He was peaking for about 6 games and then played an absolute terrible game to get broken and get back on serve in the first. Then obviously had 6-2 in the tiebreak. Nadal, to his credit, played a couple of absurdly clutch points to win that breaker, but nonetheless, it continues the trend of Zverev. Whenever victory really does seem to be in sight, that seems to be where he kind of folds. And again, it happened in the second set when Nadal, after really that second time he broke in the set, was exhausted after that 44-shot rally, and he was barely hanging on to get that set even to a breaker as he was about to. But again, the fact that Zverev let him hang around in that set is again another example of that, and that serve game trying to serve out the second at 5-3 was absolutely terrible. 3 double faults in there, and he looked tight as a drum. But ultimately, when Nadal did end up sending this second set to a breaker, unfortunately, he had that terrible injury. Obviously, I'm not going to let my personal feelings about Zverev get in the way of this. You never want to see that happen. You never want to see a match end like that. You wouldn't want to wish that on anybody. I think now we do know the severity, at least to a degree, with torn ligaments in his foot, so you just hate to see that. It really was just as Zverev was starting to get back to playing something near his best tennis this year, which we hadn't really seen to this point. and he had a pretty good shot in this match given how Nadal was really running on fumes for much of that second set. We can only really hope that this isn't really a season-ending type injury or nothing that's too long-term. Eventually, I do think had this not happened, one of these two would have crumbled physically. This match was, again, at 3 hours, 13 minutes, and we hadn't even completed 2 sets, and that was on account of these conditions. They were absolutely ridiculous. But as far as court time, I think Nadal, caught a break there. Definitely could have ended up spending a lot more time on court on that one. Given what a rigorous road it has been here, that might just have been the nail in the coffin to really have nothing left for a final. However, now we get to a spot where Nadal is undefeated. In fact, he's never even been taken 5 in his 13 finals at Roland Garros, has been utterly dominant. And given that, combined with Casper Ruud already idolizing Rafa and being in his first career major final, I think already he has an upper hand on Ruud out of the gates, just from a mental standpoint. And then I think the biggest factor, you add that on to Ruud really playing into one of Nadal's biggest go-tos, really just going to town on a righty backhand. And Casper Ruud, I don't think, has a backhand, at least in my opinion, that he really can be all that proactive with, the way that Zverev was, the way that Djokovic is. I see Ruud's backhand as more of a shield, than a sword. It is steady, it's not like a complete liability. However, against Nadal, I feel like his type of backhand is about to play right into Rafa's hands, get him into a lot of advantageous positions. Even given the conditions that we probably have, which will be under the roof again, we're supposed to get rain during the final again, so I'm assuming this is going to be under the roof. But I don't think that hurts Nadal as much as it did against Zverev. Under the roof, Zverev's serve still wasn't really blunted, but at the same time, it just made him all that much tougher of an animal on defense. Ruud, in spite of a massive improvement in serve, I don't think is going to get as much of a payoff from his serve in conditions like that, nor would he be as hard to hit through, in my opinion, as Zverev was. Even under roof, I don't anticipate this match getting to be kind of torturous that way, the way that Nadal's Zverev was for about 2 sets. Ruud does have an awesome forehand, but, him being a very big topspin reliant player as well, like Nadal, I don't think the closed roof really is going to be doing him any favors in that regard either. Ruud's serve has improved, but I really don't see it having the kind of impact it has in past matches against Nadal. I low-key think Nadal on clay, and particularly on Chatrier, is as good a returner as Djokovic, as good as anybody. He just gets so many balls back and gets them back deep to the point where you really can't do anything with them. And this is the biggest of serves he can do that to. Saw it in this tournament against the FAA, who was spot serving as well as I think anyone has against Nadal in recent memory. Zverev at times was serving lights out, and I think for the most part his percentage on the first serve getting it in was very high, and he was going big. However, Nadal just kept getting return after return back, and he really wasn't letting Zverev get too many free points there. Ruud doesn't have a serve that's as big as either of those, and I just don't see him really making the same type of inroads. And ultimately, if we're being honest, this is just going to be a very big step up in competition to who Ruud has already faced the rest of this draw. And you add that up with the mental advantage I think Rafa has, with just the vastly deeper toolkit that he has compared to Ruud. With all due respect, these are two completely different tiers of players. He has youth, obviously, but to be completely honest, I don't think that Nadal's 3 hours extra in the semifinal against Zverev are really going to end up making as big a difference as they could have. Obviously, that semi for Rafael was coming off of 2 days off, so I do think those almost 9 hours on court against FA and Djokovic were nullified to an extent. Maybe Ruud can drag this out into, a physical slugfest under the roof. That's really, I think, his only chance. But other than that, I heavily have to side with Nadal going into this one. Of course, in the past, I have been burned by losses like the Australian Open 2014 final, and even as recent as the 2022 Indian Wells final. You can never really say something is a sure thing. However, I think you really do have to like Rafa's chances heading into this one. Just seems to have a lot more options on how to go about winning this match. And at the end of the day, I just think it comes down to these two are still in two completely different tiers as far as caliber of player. No slight to Casper Ruud, of course, he's getting there. But, it is Roland Garros and final Sunday, no less. So I will be going with Rafael Nadal in 3 sets to capture a 14th Roland Garros title. That'll do it for me, though. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform better in YouTube's algorithm, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.